Welcome to another episode of Ready, Set, Procure. I'm Yolanda M. Tucker, your host. In today's episode, we are going to discuss solicitation types. We're going to go over to our doodly and learn more about solicitation types, and then I'll come back and we're going to discuss how these solicitation types would help you to increase your bottom line revenue as well as your profit margin. Welcome to Ready, Set, Procure, Lesson 1. In this lesson, we will discuss solicitation types. One solicitation type that most business owners are familiar with is the almighty RFP. A request for proposal, RFP, is a solicitation often made through a bidding process by an agency or company interested in procurement of a commodity, service, or valuable asset to potential suppliers to submit business proposals. Request for information, or an RFI, is a standard business process whose purpose is to collect written information about the capabilities of various suppliers. Normally, it follows a format that can be used for comparative purposes. A request for quote is a document that organizations submit to one or more potential suppliers, eliciting quotations for a product or service. Typically, an RFQ seeks an itemized list of prices for something that is well defined and quantifiable, such as hardware. Invitation to negotiate, or ITN, is an invitation to a preliminary discussion or an invitation by one party to the other to negotiate or make an offer. An invitation for bid, or IFB, is used in situations where potential vendors or service providers differ principally on price. Issuing an IFB allows a company to provide detailed written specifications, including all the terms and necessary conditions for work on the specific project it wants to contract out. Companies may deliver invitations to bid orally or in writing. Yay! Congratulations. You were successful in your solicitation response and you are being awarded a contract. Huh? A contract? What's a contract? A contract is any kind of written Document or verbal agreement which is or may be legally binding, including amendments, addenda, exhibits, and renewals of agreements. The term agreement is interchangeable with the term contract. Mr. Dooley is sitting at his desk and he is reviewing those contracts. Be sure to review the exhibits and appendices. Also review each and every addendum and amendment prior to executing it. The purpose of a contract is to ensure both parties document their expectations concisely so there is no confusion about what is required from each party involved in the contract. You would prefer a written contract over a verbal agreement, so anytime you can get a contract in writing, please do. So our goal is to help you become this excited, happy business owner with this extra bag of money, like this guy. We'll call him John. So John's revenue is increasing month over month because of his procurement strategy here. John is sealing deals and increasing his overall revenue as well as his profit margin. John is buying new business stuff. He's a happy camper. So we've learned different solicitation types. We learned about the almighty RFP, which stands for Request for Proposal. We learned about the RFI, which stands for Request for Information. We learned about the RFQ, which stands for Request for Quote. We learned about the ITN, which stands for Invitation to Negotiate. And we learned about the IFB, which stands for Invitation for Bid. Out of all of these solicitation types, the request for information is the least likely one to lead you to a contract. It's the least likely to lead you to an immediate contract because this is where an agency or another company is actually doing market research. They are looking into the marketplace to see what marketplace solutions are readily available that will solve or satisfy their outstanding need. In most cases, once a resolution or a solution is identified, then an RFP is created. And that is why the RFI is the least likely solicitation type that's going to lead you to a contract. Sealed government bids. The solicitation type that's usually used in sealed government bids is going to be your IFB or invitation for bid. These bids are formally advertised. The advertisements have a deadline in indicating when the company has to have the sealed bid in by. The contracting officer is going to open all sealed bids received. within the guidelines of the IFB at an appointed time. They're going to read the bids aloud, and the bids will be recorded. All interested parties can review the bids at this time. Contract is awarded to the lowest bidder pending responsible bidder verification. Responsible bidder verification is a review and approval of the contract awardee's financial reports and proprietary information. Once the responsible bidder has been verified, a contract is then executed. This sounds like a very simple process. But ladies and gentlemen, please understand there are very strict rules that apply to this process, and compiling a bid response can be a very tedious task. So let's discuss RFPs, requests for proposals, and RFQs, requests for quotes. An RFP is the more widely used solicitation vehicle or solicitation type. RFPs and RFQs are the most likely vehicle that's going to get you to an immediate contract. Both are advertised formally. In those advertisements, there's going to be a deadline. If the deadline is 9/17 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they will not take your solicitation response if you submit it at 5:01 Eastern Standard Time on 9/17. 1700 or 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9/17 is the cutoff. They will not take any additional solicitation responses after that time, and they do not care about your reason. They don't. Be mindful when you are responding to an RFP. Pay very close attention to the specifics that are required. There's usually going to be specifics like a work plan, a schedule, a staffing plan, or a capacity plan that will be required. There may also be other forms that are required to be completed and submitted with your RFP response. Once your RFP response has been submitted, the buyer or the contracting officer, or maybe the entire procurement team, there may be a segmented procurement team that's going to review your response. After the responses are reviewed and scored, they're going to select those that are deemed more competitive, the most competitive, to continue in the negotiation process. So this is where you would be shortlisted. You receive a communication from the contracting officer or the buyer letting you know that your response has been shortlisted, and negotiations at that point will begin. If there is any additional information that's needed, this is at a time that information will be requested. You may be required to do a presentation or a demonstration as part of the negotiation process. If there is an offer or of revisions, then your revisions would be submitted at this point. You're going to take into account all of the concerns that were raised during the negotiations. If there is a revision, then your proposal revision would be reviewed. And at that point, a contract is going to be awarded usually to the lowest bidder. You would have to also go through responsible bidder verification, and they're going to verify that your facilities are intact and ready to go, that your quality assurance processes are intact and ready to go, that you have the required financial backing to take on this project, and that you have the capacity to take on this project. Once your responsible bidder verification has been concluded, a contract will be executed. Now that we've had an opportunity to review and discuss solicitation types, I'd like to leave you with a couple of Tucker tidbits. These are nuggets of information that I hope will help you as a small business owner continue to develop your procurement strategy. So my first Tucker tidbit is bouncing bids. Badly written RFPs can leave vendors unable to accurately bid a project. This is a buyer's nightmare because it creates an inaccurate scope to project actual project budget versus budget perspective. So usually when they put together an RFP or RFI, or even sometimes an RFQ, they're going to do a budget perspective, and that's going to tell them what they think that is going to cost to do this project. And once the bids start coming in, they can actually get a actual scope of what the costs are going to be for that particular project, for that actual project. But if you're getting bouncing bids where some are high or some are low, it's very difficult to have an accurate view or accurate picture of what that actual project budget is going to look like. So that's really bad for the buyer. But it's also really bad for you as the business owner because your bid should be um, pretty much comparable. If you're bidding the same product or service because it costs you the same amount to make or to make this product or to produce this service. So your bid should be pretty comparative over over your bid portfolio. Of course, with price increases, as required and negotiated. So, as a business owner, one of the first things you want to do is you want to make sure that you review that RFP thoroughly. And so, when we get to that in these sessions, we're going to actually go through. I'm going to do screencasts with you guys, and you're going to see how I actually go through and thoroughly review an RFP before I even put pen to paper to try to respond. You need to do an RFP analysis. You need to understand what the risk of those RFPs are and how do you as a company mitigate those risks. But again, that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. After you've read that RFP thoroughly, you should be documenting or notating questions as you go along that RFP. And there's going to be a question and answer period that's identified in the RFP. And at that, you want to make sure that you ask clarifying questions during that question and answer period. Okay. And you want to make sure that you follow the directions of who you can ask. And like I said, you want to make sure you ask within the time frame that is given. Apples to oranges. You want to understand what you are bidding. You may be bidding apples and the buyer is asking you for oranges. Vague RFPs can lead to bidders making their own assumptions, and those assumptions can lead to very costly errors later on. So I told you guys at the beginning of this series that I was going to tell you some stories. So here's one. I worked for a company that was a subcontractor to a prime contractor. The subcontractor, the company that I worked for, they had a book of business very similar to this book of business that they were about to bid. They got the bid. They realized that it was very similar to a book of business that they already had. And so, unfortunately, nobody really reviewed the bid and made sure that they understood what they were bidding. They bid the contract, they won the contract. When they were required to deliver on their first delivery, that's when it all broke loose. So the customer at that point realized that what the subcontractor had bidded was not a response to the bid that was currently on the table. So what happened was the subcontractor looked at this bid. They said, "Oh, we've had this business before." And they literally submitted the very same bid that they submitted to for the first book of business. Well, some things had changed in this bid solicitation. There were a number of parts in the first bid solicitation that the prime contractor supplied. In this solicitation, the current solicitation, the prime contractor was not supplying those parts anymore. Fast forward a year and a half, 2 years at first delivery. First delivery was a nightmare because the subcontractor did not deliver what they had contracted for. And they did not deliver that because they did not read and respond to the current RFP. This created a $60 million deficit. Let me repeat that. $60 million deficit. um, the subcontractor went in, and because there was some vague language in the RFP, they were able to negotiate it down from 60 million to a $15 million deficit. So that meant the subcontractor owed the prime contractor $15 million. That was the negotiated settlement. Now, let me ask you guys, as a small business owner, how many of you can afford a $15 million deficit? Not many. Okay. This particular subcontractor barely survived. They're literally hanging on by a thread now. And at the end of the day, it cost a lot of people jobs. A lot of people jobs were eliminated because there was a 15 ended up being a $15 million negotiated settlement. That's a lot of money. Okay. Do not be afraid to no bid. Okay. This is a great Tucker tidbit. This is a great nugget. Look at that RFP. Make sure you analyze all the risk of that RFP. If the RFP is too vague and you cannot identify those risks, or if the risks are too great and you cannot mitigate those risks, no bid. Okay? No bid. Sometimes crickets, and the reason a company no bids will help the buyer be more specific in identifying the need and their desired solution. Okay, so again, do not be afraid to no bid. Usually, if you no bid, the buyer or the contracting officer will request that you submit a no bid form, and they're asking you on that form what's your reasoning for no bidding the project. Okay, all right, here's Tucker tidbit number 4. you get you get what you don't want, a headache. Okay, so if you have a vague RFP, if you cannot understand the RFP requirements and you bid that RFP anyway, you are going to get what you don't want, and that is going to be a headache. Okay, I've witnessed prime contractors sending schedule recovery agents on site. It is not a pretty picture. Okay. I've seen program managers that have had schedule recovery agents in their office where they had to eat lunch with these schedule recovery agents. They had to do everything with these schedule recovery agents because the prime contractor was not going to allow this subcontractor to um, default on the schedule again. So they needed those uh, products or services and they needed them on time. And so they actually sent a schedule recovery agent in. And in some cases, in some cases, it's worse than having the FBI in your office. That is just true. So when you respond to a vague RFP, or if you respond to an RFP vaguely, you may get what you do not want, which is a headache. So let's try to avoid all headaches if at all possible. And Tucker tidbit number 5 is going to be that vague RFP that actually turns into a specific contract. Okay. So you responded to a very vague RFP, and that now vague RFP has turned into a very specific contract. And you were excited. You didn't really even read the contract. You just signed it. And what you signed was you signed to produce a widget for 100, but you responded to the RFP advising that you actually produced a gadget for 1,000, and that gadget for 1,000 could be converted over into a widget for 100, but you also advised that the adapter is no longer available in the marketplace to make that conversion. And the contracting officer or the buyer, they read your response and they were like, oh, okay, well, this person can give us the widget for 100. And they wrote that contract stating that you could produce and provide this widget for 100. Again, you're excited. You sign the contract. You don't go through and make sure that it says you are providing a gadget for 1,000 that can be converted into a widget for 100. Now, a lot of times during the negotiation process, this is where that stuff will be clarified, okay? But sometimes it doesn't get clarified. And now you're on the line, on the hook, on a contractual hook for a widget for 100, yet you produce a gadget for 1,000. That's a problem. And what's going to happen next? Yeah, legal is going to probably definitely get involved in this. And that's what we want to avoid. So I hope that these Tucker tidbits will help you. And so I'm going to go over them one more time. And that's going to be bouncing bids. You don't want bids that are really, really high and bids that are really, really low. You want all of your bids to be right around the same um, uh, spectrum. That's the word I'm looking for, the same spectrum. Okay. You want them to be in that same spectrum because if it's the same product or service, you shouldn't have a bid that's $100 and a bid that's $100,000. They should be in the same spectrum of price. Okay. And delivery, responsibility and delivery. You want to make sure as a business owner that you review that RFP thoroughly and that you ask questions along the way. You want to make sure that you are not um, giving apples and they are asking for oranges. So again, you want to make sure that you don't make any assumptions. You have an understanding of exactly what is being asked of you. Please be sure again that you are reviewing these RFPs with a fine-tooth comb and asking those questions. Don't be afraid to no bid. Um, Sometimes it's just not for you, and we're going to talk about some contracts that I, as a CEO, had to walk away from in some later one of our later sessions. Remember, you get what you don't want, and that's a headache. So you want to make sure that you understand the request and that you are responding um, in context. Okay, you do not want to schedule a recovery agent in your place of business eating lunch with you every day. And then you also want to make sure that a vague RFP does not turn into a specific contract and that you can perform under the contractual requirements. I hope that this has been information that will help you as you continue to press forward and get that procurement strategy in place for your organization. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.